Welcome to the Fright Lab. I'm Lucas Yoakum. And with me tonight is the producer who would never quibble over semantics, Joseph Wren.
I insist on debating semantics only because of the importance and the accuracy of the words therein. And what I really meant to say is, how are you this evening? All of you gruesome people. I've been waiting a little while for Lucas to get into a clarifying state of mind. Tonight's episode will focus on two concepts, comparing them in the context of the horror films that we love so much. Spooky versus scary.
He's quibbling. That is absolutely quibbling. But I like quibbling. It's kind of what I do. It's kind of part of my whole shtick, as some of you have figured out. So let's dive in, see what happens. The last few years have been really, really good for horror fans. Last year, 2024, we saw the release of 4 films that racked up a shocking amount of awards. These numbers all come from IMDb and will be in the show notes. So let's start with Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. It was nominated for 4 Oscars, 5 BAFTAs, and 4 Critics' Choice Awards. All total, it was nominated for, get this, 176 awards and won 58.
Wow.
Yeah. Alien Romulus, directed by Fede Alvarez, was nominated for 43 awards and won 13, including 1 Oscar and 1 Golden Globe nomination.
I was so happy with that film.
You know, it did some stuff that I was kind of about, but overall, I really liked Alien Romulus. It was a lot of fun. Okay, what about Longlegs from Osgood Perkins? It was nominated for 16 awards and won 6. I really liked Longlegs. Really took me by surprise. It was really good.
I'm giving it a third watch. I think the first time I was a little cynical about it. It looked like another Us clone where it was a really solid horror thriller. But then again, it was jamming to the same tune of other psychological thrillers in the past. I wanted to get past that, and I really liked it because it's fucking weird, dude. It's up there with Hereditary in my eyes.
I can almost see that. Kind of having watched Osgood Perkins' other I don't want to say it's his big break, but it was one of his earlier films, a movie called The Black Coat's Daughter, having, I think, watched it, I would say, like 1.5 times all total.
There's something to be said about horror movies in eras. And in the modern last 15 years of horror movies, Longlegs, it deserves a spot. It's not at the top, but it deserves a spot because of how weird it is.
How weird and dark and deeply uncomfortable it is. I will sit and talk about Longlegs one of these days, but another time.
Maybe once we get past spooky versus scary, we can talk about the eras of horror.
That could be fun. Okay, let's move on. Another movie that did really, really well. How about Maxine from Ty West and Mia Goth? 6 nominations. Not too shabby. I'm a big fan of that whole series, but that was the culmination of it. 6 nominations. Finally, The Substance, directed by Coraline Farge. It won 138 awards and was nominated for 274.
Hold on. How many awards are there? I need an actual scaled count of this is how many there are, this is how many you're eligible for, and you got this many.
I mean, maybe that'll be a silly Patreon thing one of these days. Who knows? Okay, and while some of the awards that The Substance picked up might have lacked the prestige of the Oscars or whatever, these movies all, wall to wall, punched way, way over the historically expected weight limit of the genre. Sure, I'll own the fact that Maxine was not as hugely popular of a film as Alien Romulus. And yeah, Longlegs had the podcast favorite Nicolas Cage in his most hideous role yet, like really genuinely upsetting. It was a hard watch in a couple of spots, but I'll say that it does make the appearance of Demi Moore, who is always a welcome sight on screen, way more enjoyable, even in an absolutely fucking gut-churning body horror like The Substance. I know that it sounds like I'm just kind of rambling here, and I assure you that I am not. In previous episodes, we've discussed how horror has been having this, moment in the last few years. Specifically, go check our episode on elevated horror. It was a debate we've sort of had ongoing for a while. That's episode 12 of February 2023, if memory serves me correctly. I am not going to relitigate the elevated horror episode again here. What I will say is that the 5 movies I've listed here have helped strike a chord with audiences that I don't think anyone could have expected. And that's especially interesting to me, considering that none of these movies are even remotely similar to one another, right? Nosferatu used atmosphere to build dread. Sure, it was pretty dark, pretty fucked up, but mostly relied on atmosphere. Maxine, on the other hand, uses this proto-slasher 70s, 80s thing to weave a dense, scary mystery. It's a horror movie, absolutely, but it's almost like a crime thriller, right? Okay, Longlegs. Well, what was it doing? Longlegs attempts to smother the audience. Like, that is the thing it does more than anything. It uses tension and uncanny weirdness to just absolutely strangle the audience. Brilliant, I thought, but here again, time for another episode. Alien Romulus. It calls upon its predecessors within creature feature roots with some gross out nightmarishness and brutal jump scares that would have made H.R. Giger nod with approval. Horrible, phallic approval. Finally, The Substance. This movie weaves an intense commentary about identity, our culture's obsession with youth and beauty, and a great big boatload of Cronenbergian body horror freakishness. Honestly, as someone who's been writing and recording a podcast about horror for the last several years, I've been very happy to see all of these movies. They've sort of relit a fire under me about what horror movies can be. Horror can, quote unquote, say something, and it doesn't need a mega budget to wow an audience. One of the happiest things about this batch of movies is that they're making me think about horror in a fundamentally different way. Specifically, what are these movies doing to cause such a stir? I've started to think about horror almost at its most basic elements. I'm trying to analyze what these movies use as tools against their audience's sense of comfort. In his book, Danse Macabre, Stephen King was analyzing horror media through the lens of societal fears all the way back in 1981. That book is as old as me, to give you some time frame, right? In that text, he opines somewhat famously, quote, "I recognize terror as the finest emotion, and so I will try to terrorize the reader. But if I find I cannot terrify him or her, I will try to horrify. And if I cannot horrify, I'll go for the gross out. I'm not proud." End quote. And while that is a pithy, fun description of his craft, he's actually making an interesting comment there. What King is actually doing here is drawing a distinction between things that are terrifying, horrifying, and just plain gross. And I won't attempt to summarize those points here. I think you should go get a copy of Danse Macabre and read it. For its time period, it's arguably one of the best commentaries on horror ever made. It still holds up in many regards, and it belongs on your bookshelf. In a similar vein, tonight's episode is aimed at answering a question. What is scary? And as a result, I want to draw a distinction between scary and its very close relative, spooky. It might seem like a silly distinction, but it's one that modern audiences might draw real value from. As well, I want to use this episode to start a conversation about maybe the most sacred duty of all horror fans. How do we recommend horror movies or horror media to an audience that is less aware of its tropes? Follow me in. We should probably define our terms before we proceed. I'm aware that using dictionary definitions in the beginning of an argument seems lame. I also acknowledge that it makes me sound like more of a pedant than normal. Guys, I know how I sound. But if we're going to return to the basics of horror criticism, we need to at least agree upon our language. For some, spooky and scary might be synonyms, and in casual conversation, I think that makes sense. Allegedly, serious critics are quick to throw around descriptors to help make their arguments, and I just don't want to follow that trend, I guess. So, here is our first point. What does scary mean? According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, scary is an adjective meaning something that causes fright. So you could say, The Witch is a scary movie. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so what about spooky? Merriam-Webster goes on to define it as strange, unsettling, or frightening in a way that suggests the supernatural, eerie, or uncanny. Now, of course, there is an overlap with the word frightening, but the suggestion of the supernatural being strange or unsettling, eerie, or uncanny, well, that's very different, right? You could say The Witch is spooky, and I would also agree with that. But would you describe Maxine as spooky? I wouldn't. The movie doesn't have any real supernatural elements, and without spoiling anything, it's in keeping with the spirit of the other movies in its trilogy. Kind of a slasher with some really strong, really good dramatic elements. It's not really eerie or uncanny. Sure, it's strange in many ways. I would urge you to go watch the opening 35 minutes of Pearl. It is a little weird. Those of you who know now have a new feeling about scarecrows. That's all I'm going to say. But I'm not going to say that those movies are spooky. I would also say the same thing about Alien Romulus. Body horror galore. Plenty of blood and upsetting kills. Terrible things happen to rabbits in that film. Some of the elements of the xenomorph are a little uncanny, but I wouldn't describe them as supernatural. Alien Romulus is scary, but it's not spooky, right? Okay, what about Eggers' Nosferatu? I mean, really, we could ask the question, what about all of the Nosferatu films? But focusing in here. Eggers' Nosferatu, it has some genuinely scary moments, and it plays with really scary themes like predation. But Nosferatu, however you slice it, is about a vampire. A hulking, hungry cadaver stalking and killing the living freaking dead. Nosferatu might scare you, but I think it's overall more spooky than scary. It's gross. Real gross. But it's more spooky than scary, right? Well, therefore, are all vampire movies spooky? Well, Joe, have you ever seen Near Dark? It's a vampire movie starring Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen, centers around nomadic vampires taking on a new member. Havoc ensues.
Please excuse me while I add that to my watch this before October list. I haven't seen that one. I'm interested in the concept here. So you're saying this is one where the vampire is not supernatural in nature, like a Dracula Untold or any of the Vampire Chronicles?
It's a little weirder than that. Catherine Bigelow directed it. The name Catherine Bigelow is like tickling your brain. Catherine Bigelow directed The Hurt Locker. So it's a real weird one. Near Dark is a pretty interesting flick. It's pretty intense in a few spots. It's not a favorite of mine. I'm not terribly fond of Catherine Bigelow, the director. And while I think it's a mostly effective horror film, it's not spooky in the slightest. The vampires are brutal, but not really like supernatural. Like, yeah, they're supernatural, they're vampires. But you don't see the typical vampire stuff outside of death, blood drinking, and solar aversion. There's nothing seductive about these bloodsuckers, really. It's kind of the same as Nosferatu in that way, but hear me out. On a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of seduction, if 1 is Radu from Subspecies and 10 is the vampire Lestat, they're roughly 3 or 4. You're not going to brag about going on a date with any of these guys. You know what I mean?
For a moment, I was thinking the vampire, not supernatural, so we're kind of in ravenous territory, one of my absolute favorite weird films about cannibalism. We're not getting into that tonight. Lucas actually has a ban on it, and I'm probably already in trouble for bringing it up.
You are not in trouble. We are not that. We do not have that kind of creative relationship. But suffice it to say, in an upcoming episode, I'm going to talk about Ravenous.
Thank you very much.
Because I fucking love that movie.
The one that came to mind for me, though, outside of that, the film Kronos. Have you seen that?
That's Guillermo del Toro, right?
Absolutely. I believe it's his debut film as a major director.
I don't know if that was his debut or not. We're sitting in front of a computer terminal. We could very easily look this up. But it was like one of his first few real big movies, Kronos and The Devil's Backbone, which, man, if you've never seen The Devil's Backbone, holy shit, that's a good movie. But yeah, Kronos, I have seen that. It is a vampire movie in a sense, yeah.
I bring it up because if we're drawing the line at this point between spooky and scary, that spooky is more supernatural in nature, otherworldly, and scary is reality. Kronos is a very good example of that because it doesn't really personify the vampire. It talks about immortality. And knowing kind of the end result going into it, the previews really give it away, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything.
Sure.
It becomes clear that though the method is similar to the traditional vampire, it's more like an infection, a disease. So at this point, it's a sliding scale. It's not, is it spooky, is it scary? It's where do you fall on the scale between these two things? If it's being pulled in both directions, I'm a 1 on the scary and like 9 on the spooky.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. We can talk about the difference between spooky and scary in terms of action, but I think a better distinction is about atmosphere and ambiance, right? To me, being scared is about fear of death or violence. A good example, okay? I know I go to this example a lot, but it's worth, just hear me out, okay? Leatherface might hack you up with power tools, or he might wear part of you as like decoration.
Or both.
He's very equal opportunity in that regard. But are you going to say that Leatherface is eerie? Are you bothered by Leatherface because he's threatening, or that there's like something weird about him?
That is a great question.
No, it's not. Come on.
It absolutely is.
It's not. Leatherface is scary, but he's not spooky. He's big, he's violent, doesn't listen to reason, and sadly, he seems to really enjoy his work, right?
This isn't Michael Myers happens to be walking around during Halloween, so people don't know he's scary. You're just saying Leatherface as a singular individual, the character, the concept. If I see it, yeah, that's not spooky. That's fucking scary.
I think if you see it, you're fucked. Let's start there. If you see Leatherface for any reason, you're about to have a real bad and much shorter day than you had anticipated.
Bringing in the sheaves. Bringing in the sheaves.
Right. But, Michael Myers just walking around. Well, I mean, maybe I'm just jaded, but I lived in St. Louis in the early 2000s. I'm just used to weird people doing weird shit. That's just me. All right. But anyway, let's change gears for a second. What about a movie like Eraserhead? Any of the denizens of the world that exist in a movie like Eraserhead, they're not really threatening, right? I mean, are you scared of the lady in the radiator? She's freaky, but you're not really worried about her attacking you. Now, she probably is going to sing a weird song, and it's probably going to be super duper awkward, but that's not threatening. Cringe-inducing, but not threatening. Are you worried that the Eraserhead baby might attack you in the middle of the night? Of course not. Might turn you off of your Chinese takeout that you have in the kitchen, and it'll definitely make you reconsider parenthood. But the Eraserhead baby is weird, uncanny, gross, upsetting. The film Eraserhead, it's definitely spooky. It's weird as fuck, but definitely just spooky, right? And very weird. Joe, I've got to do an episode on Eraserhead, don't I?
I'm surprised it's taken you this long to come to this conclusion, as I know Eraserhead to be your favorite Lynch film.
I don't know that it's my favorite. You know what? That's for another episode. That is a Patreon bonus perk that we're going to do eventually, I'm sure.
I am not a fan of Eraserhead, but I find myself mesmerized by it.
Hold on. What do you mean you're not a fan of Eraserhead? Explain yourself to me.
As you have just said, it is very weird. It is very upsetting. And the line of, I've seen it and I don't really want to watch it again, that's where Eraserhead sits with me. I'll do it for you, for the episode, but I don't want to.
Do it for the pod, Joe. Do it for the pod. I get that. I think that's fair, actually. That's reasonable.
It's up there with Black Mirror. Like, I've experienced this and I have zero interest in going back to it.
You know,
now, if you want to talk about Old Boy, I'm there. Let's go back to that as much as possible.
You feel about Eraserhead the way I feel about Lars von Trier's Antichrist. I'm glad I've seen it. I'm glad I own a copy. Have I watched it more than twice? Are you out of your fucking mind? Of course I haven't. That movie hurts. Okay, so before we get on to the second question in this episode, I want to take just like one quick side path. Fans, I know you're all laughing. Siblings, you know that me taking one quick side path is a fucking joke. Anyway, I think the scary spooky distinction is more than just a matter of how we're using adjectives. I am a writer at heart. I spend a lot of time writing these scripts, as I'm sure you guys have all noticed. And for me, being a writer entails that words have meaning outside of their definitions. The language we use matters in many ways, and if philosophers or linguists are to be believed, those ways are way deeper than we even begin to fully get, okay? In the 2009 edition of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Chris Swoyer provides a helpful outline for what's called the linguistic relativity hypothesis. Going forward, you might hear me just refer to this idea as linguistic relativity. Also, before I say anything else, I know I am not a linguist. I am a guy with a podcast who has an interest in bigger ideas than podcasts. So, if you are a linguist and you want to explain this idea, or to our audience, you can reach out to us, thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure you title the email, "What the hell are you talking about that's not linguistics?" Okay, so in this edition of the encyclopedia, Swoyer says, quote, "Many thinkers have urged that large differences in language lead to large differences in experience and thought. They hold that each language embodies a worldview, with quite different languages embodying quite different views, so that speakers of different languages think in the world in quite different ways." End quote. Now, the first time I heard of the idea was in the context of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis while I was in college. The hypothesis basically posits the theory that Swoyer explains, but also makes the argument in somewhat black and white terms, so much that Swoyer describes it as a quote-unquote partisan issue. Personally, I don't feel like I'm sufficiently educated enough on the subject to have a skin in the game. But I think it's really interesting that language can be so powerful as to shape our actual way of thinking and understanding. One of the ways this hits me is the connotation of a word being shown how the word ends up being used. Someone in the modern world who falls into a broadly Christian religious worldview would use the word demonic to describe something evil, influenced by the devil, a malevolent force or a destructive force, or being possessed by powers beyond your control. But if you were living in the era of Plato in ancient Greece, you would have a significantly different understanding of the word. Our use of the word demon comes from the Greek word daemon. Phonetically, that's not a surprise, right? For the Greeks, the term meant spirit or tutelary deity, a semi-divine figure that you learn from or protects you. You might have a devotion towards this entity, but it's not exactly a god. In an article from Austin Peay State University philosophy journal, Philomathes, we find out that the daimones, the plural of demons, enables supernatural activities like divination and dreams. Daimones guide men through their lives by reminding them of the divine order humans cannot see on their own. Their liminal function may also be expressed more directly, as is illustrated in the dialogues by the demon of Socrates. The daemonic entity warns Socrates directly, as a voice, when he ought to stop what he is doing, and it guides his educational mission. It shows what the gods will, unquote. By the way, I don't speak Greek, so if daimones is incorrect, I don't know what to tell you guys. Just email me and correct me, okay? Please, I appreciate it. I admit, that's heady, thought-provoking stuff. Most of us who grew up in an ostensibly Christian culture could be excused for being surprised at the mention of Socrates or Plato being in contact with demons if we don't really know the context, history, or origin of the words. But the ancient Greeks, being pre-Christian for centuries, would have meaning and value vastly different from our own. They might not recognize the idea of a supremely evil entity seeking to ruin people. Sure, there might be monsters or destructive supernatural forces like the Titans in their mythology, but they simply might not have had the concept the way we have it. I've included several articles on linguistic relativity in the show notes for this episode, and I strongly encourage you give them a read. There's even a link to the article about Plato and the daimonic. Please give it a look. Okay, Joe, I'm sure that the audience is starting to wonder where I'm going with this.
Let's find our mark. Let's roll the ball down the lane and pick up this spare. We started talking about spooky versus scary, so I imagine you are doing your best to define the terms so that we can effectively state our thesis.
Okay, so
excuse me for just pulling it right out of the grammar notebook from my college days.
That's fair. Maybe this should be subtitled Joe and Lucas go back to school for an afternoon, but
how to write a proper thesis.
It's 2025. I can't afford to go back to school. Are you kidding me? Not yet. Not yet. Anyway, here's my view. And I'll tell you now, it's a work in progress, and it will certainly evolve over the course of this podcast's lifespan. In short, I think that the way we use language is a powerful indicator of the state of our personal world. If you describe a movie as scary, it relates to a threat of violence. If a movie is spooky, it has an unsettling or upsetting atmosphere. If we're able to name our feelings towards these pieces of art, we can begin to better understand and draw meaning from our non-cinematic lives. I set out to create a show that helps us explore our fears and our darker emotions. The Fright Lab is the name of the show, but it's also kind of the central conceit of our episodes, right? If a Fright Lab exists, it's in horror as a genre. We have the ability to experiment with these ideas and have a richer, more meaningful life as a result. And that means it's not just an excuse for me to sit in front of a microphone and talk about this thing I really enjoy. I swear that's what I mean. Finally, let's talk about how we can be better at recommending our favorite genre to those who are, less horror-centric. I'm typically asked multiple times a month to recommend horror movies to friends who aren't, as far down the rabbit hole of this genre as I am. I also understand how hard it is to not recommend some genuinely soul-scarring pieces of nightmare cinema to the unexpecting. We have all looked into the abyss, or just have a profound imp of the perverse in our lives. Alas, the best thing we can do is be an ambassador for the genre we all love and not immediately give in to that imp of the perverse. I want to suggest that we begin that process of recommendation of knowing a little bit about the person who has asked for it. And by that, I don't mean they asked for it, like give them the worst thing you can give them. And that's where we need to ask ourselves the first question. Do they want spooky? Or do they want scary? This might not be something that one can directly ask. They might not understand this admittedly quiet distinction that we're making. So here's where I start. I ask something like, are you more interested in haunted houses or true crime? That might seem like a trifling distinction, at least to them, but it's extremely important for us. If someone wants a haunted house experience more than they want a true crime experience, well, you don't start with something like Longlegs, right? At this point, it would be wise to start with some additional probing questions. Do you want a haunted house that is a longer movie? Or something around 90 minutes long? If you want a 90-minute kind of joint, don't recommend The Changeling. Now, obviously, we aren't in a video game. There is no perfect dialogue tree that will help find a perfect movie for someone. But here's where those skills we're developing here in the Fright Lab start to pay off. If you know your person, your friend, has certain sensitivities to religious imagery, stay clear of The Exorcist or The Omen. What are you, psycho? Don't do that to them. But you might find that they really enjoy something like The Last House on the Left, which would make me ask some questions about your friend, why they enjoy that movie particularly. There's a pretty good chance that they've seen some of your bigger named movies about serial killers, think Silence of the Lambs. But maybe they've never seen Angst or The Golden Glove. Naturally, I am going to be the one who's gonna make obscure recommendations. I'm sorry, guys, that's just who I am. But what if they're maybe less online or less into music and movies outside of the mainstream? Well, the good news is that there are plenty of horror movies that are readily available on places like Shudder, Tubi, or whatever. Deadstream is a great one for people who want scares with a bit of comedy. It's been on Shudder, I think, since it came out, and I want to say it's on Tubi. Okay. What if they want something more serious and more intense? Do they like H.P. Lovecraft? Then push them towards The Void. And if they don't, then push them towards The House of the Devil. It's a little slow-paced, but it's pretty freaking scary. I've given a bunch of examples that clearly go outside of the spooky, scary binary continuum. And hell, I just might have to make some sort of handy infographic explaining what this all means. I know that there are some movies that I'll just recommend out of habit because I just think they're super effective horror movies. Midsommar, The Sudbury Devil, Train to Busan, and Haunt are movies that I am extremely quick to recommend almost without reservation. And go ahead and recommend some classics. Do you know how many people have actually never seen The Mummy or the original Night of the Living Dead? Joe, I'm sure you have some go-to recommendations. What do you got?
I like twisting the obvious into the less obvious because that was part of my journey into horror films and scary movies, scary subjects. So when somebody says, yeah, I really like movies about vampires. Oh yeah, what's your favorite movie? Bela Lugosi in Dracula. You'd be surprised how many people have not watched the Hammer horror films.
Oh, you're talking like Christopher Lee as Dracula.
Absolutely. That plus The Abominable Dr. Phibes.
Hell yes.
Dr. Phibes Rides Again, only for the comedy of it because that's what it is. But there's no one answer for anybody. The scariest movie I've ever seen is not the spookiest. And I'm borrowing from your definitions and twisting them a little bit. You know, there is such a thing as the spooky film about vampires and ghosts, and I like your explanation. Do you want haunted house or do you want true crime? That is how I keep it straight in my head. Do you want a ghost floating by the window going, woo, or do you want crazy motherfucker trying to kill you? And depending on the person, that's how I answer. I like going in the direction of the surreal. You know, we've mentioned House on more than one episode, and I think that's a perfect example of the films you've seen generally are versions of the same old themes. There are people that think The Exorcist is the scariest movie ever. We've talked about this. So a film like House takes the surreal, spooky, and makes it into a fucked up dream, and that puts people in a different direction. So I wish I could say there's one film or there's one thought line I go to when somebody says, I really want to see a scary movie. I think it depends on the person, and I think your questions are the perfect way to frame that up. I love answering the question, what's a bad horror movie? Because those are the ones that I don't want to waste my time on, but I've seen them.
Okay, so let's do our scientific due diligence here and say, what defines a bad movie? What do you like? We could sit and talk about what are bad movies. Like, what are some bad movies we've seen? I don't know. Let's go with The Howling 4, The Marsupials. Boy, that's a bad one.
One of the characteristics of a bad movie is when the plot, the photography, and the score are executed in the most predictable fashion possible. Case in point, White Noise.
All right.
One of my least favorite horror films of all time. It's more spooky than it is scary.
Sure.
But it didn't do anything I wasn't expecting to happen. So as soon as you say to yourself, 3, 2, 1, jump scare, there was a jump scare. As soon as you say the ending of this movie is it's all been a ruse and they're actually demon ghost things that are just going to kill him as soon as they end up in a warehouse by themselves. And that's exactly what happens. So it's like Shutter Island. It's supposed to be like a mind-bending thriller, but it's not. You see the twist coming.
First things first. Spoilers for White Noise, I guess.
It's not worth spoiling, my friend.
Guys, he's not spoiling anything. That movie sucks. Which is interesting because you take a very similar concept in the movie Pulse, which is fucking deeply upsetting. I think it's even now in 2025, many years after the internet has moved on pretty substantially, I still think Pulse is very scary. Or One Missed Call, the original Japanese One Missed Call, I think is very scary still. I think it still works. It kind of brings up some interesting questions about, bad versus good movies. So much of that is a matter of taste, right? I will stand on my love for the movie Subspecies, but I'll be the first to tell you it is not a good movie. And the latter-day Subspecies sequels are they're Hellraiser 6 bad. They are
wow.
Yeah, I listen, I love the Bloodstone as much as anybody else, man, but I got to draw the line somewhere, I guess.
Remember the time Pinhead was just a pillar on the wall? Literally, it's a head inside of a giant pole of wood, man. I'm sorry, that was Hellraiser 3.
Oh, man, Hellraiser 3 is really bad. I'm sorry.
Stop talking nonsense.
I know people love Hellraiser 3, but oh, God, it's bad. Woof. Anyway, I think the bad movie question's a really interesting one. I've said this in other episodes, too. People will say, Lucas, you like bad movies. And I always argue, no, I like weird movies. And that's true. But even I like some bad movies. I'll be the first to own that I like some bad movies. I think The Human Centipede is still very entertaining. I don't think it's a good movie, but I think it's very entertaining. I think the Human Centipede 2 is a fucking nightmare. I think that's one of the most gross things I've watched, but
By design.
it hits the mark. It's actually great. You know, and bad is such a convoluted word now, right? When you're talking about horror movies anyway. Because, you know, and we've talked about this before. Go back to Untitled Bad Shark Movie episode. I don't even remember what number that is anymore. But if you go back to that movie or to that episode, you can tell that a lot of movies were made with absolutely zero consideration of whether or not they would be quote unquote good films. They were made cheap. They were made to make a couple bucks, and they were made with the fuck it, I'll watch anything crowd in mind. But are they as bad as Shark Exorcist? And let me go ahead and answer that for you in case you're wondering, what the hell is Shark Exorcist? No, nothing is as bad as Shark Exorcist. It's still the worst thing I've ever watched. Oh, God.
Don't make me go get the Serum DVD.
It's not that bad.
It's bad.
It's not good, but it's not that bad. It's just, Joe, it's just not that bad.
It's pretty fucking bad, Lucas.
But it's not as bad as Shark Exorcist. A sentence I never thought I would have to use. But the bad movie thing's kind of an interesting litmus test for this subject, right? I think that we say, oh, well, these are bad movies. We're not meant to enjoy them. Well, let's shift gears for a second, right? Let's look at the Sinbad movies of the 60s through the late 70s. Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, the last in the cinematic Sinbad universe. It is not a good movie. I get that. The acting's wooden. The characters are kind of unbelievable, but it has great special effects by Ray Harryhausen. I love Ray Harryhausen. Sorry, that's where one of my heart will always go to Harryhausen's stop motion stuff. And I think there is an element of saying, well, bad maybe, but enjoyable. That's a question, right? No one is gonna mistake Shark Exorcist for enjoyable. You might have a couple brews with your friends and put on Shark Exorcist and have a few laughs. I think if your friends suggest that, maybe you need new friends. But the point being is that you can enjoy a movie and have it be a bad movie. And as we've talked about in other episodes, a movie doesn't have to be quote unquote saying something to be a good movie. There are plenty of movies I like that have no deeper meaning other than sometimes scary shit happens and they're enjoyable on their own. I can see what you're doing. Why are you looking up Shark Exorcist right now? Do you not like me anymore? Is that what's happening here?
I'm bringing the pain.
Thanks, Pinhead. Appreciate it, brother. Anyway, you know, I guess at the end of the day, I sincerely just think that there's a horror movie for everybody, in the same way that I suspect there are comedies that are for everyone somewhere, or there's a drama for every person, and so on. Me, I've just hitched my horse to a wagon called terror, at least in this space. I do like a good action flick, and I like sci-fi just fine. I'm also really respectful of someone telling me that the world is scary enough and that they don't need to spend time getting scary images out of their head at night. I get that. I do. I genuinely do. Life is hard enough without some bearded asshole with a podcast telling you to watch stuff you don't like. And I'm also not naive enough to think that two guys on a podcast talking horror movies is enough to change the world. But what I will suggest is that there are those of us thinking about genre, not just horror, but just genre in general. What genre is, its conventions, its limitations. And in that, we have an opportunity. There will be someone who wants something more out of their media diet. And maybe, just maybe, siblings, we can help them find it. And so, with that, my dear audience, what do you think? Are you on Team Spooky or Team Scary? And is my distinction between these two ideas terribly valuable? And what's your favorite movie to recommend to somebody? Do you have a go-to horror flick you like to throw in someone's lap? You should let us know what that is by emailing us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on all major social media platforms and podcatchers by searching for The Fright Lab. Now, Joe, would you kindly tell our friends about our Discord and where they can find your other projects?
Discord.thefrightlab.com. That is where this conversation will continue and where we want to hear from all of you. If you're a fan of Blue Sky or Threads, Facebook, you can find us on there as well. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about spooky versus scary. And we want to know what films you recommend to your friends when they need a little bit of help adding some terror to their life. You heard Lucas say it, thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. Send us an email. If this is the first episode you've listened to The Fright Lab, welcome. Thank you for listening. If this is not your first episode, we thank you for coming back. There's always going to be more, and there's plenty that came before. What I need from you right now is to take out your phone, scroll to the left, the right, find the place to leave the 5-star review, give us the thumbs up, leave some comments, let us know how you feel about spooky versus scary. The Dammit Janets have been making some seriously scary rock and roll, and you can find everything about that at thedammitjanets.com. If you're a fan of all things heavy metal, you need to be listening to all the podcasts we are creating at discussmetal.com. We talk about your favorite bands, my favorite bands, heavy metal subjects. Lucas, please tell all of the gruesome people how much we appreciate independent artists and independent media.
Longlegs won a lot of awards. No arguments there. The Substance, award-winning, fantastic movie. Nosferatu, I went and saw it on Christmas morning. That should tell you something about how I felt about that film. But you want to know what? None of those movies get to us today, here we are, without the background and support of independent films. Sure, Nosferatu was released on Christmas morning in most major American theaters, but it started with The Witch being the little film that could. So, are you making the next The Witch? Are you making some next level dark ambient shit? Are you just hip to the new horror grooves that we're not? You should let us know. You can reach out to us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, The Fright Lab is written and researched by me, Lucas Yoakum. Our producer, engineer, and co-host is the one and only Joseph Wren. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we will talk to you all again very soon.
That's Fright Lab for you.
Let me redo that because I had mispronounced Geiger and I'd never forgive myself. Let me drink some water. I'm trying to do this episode buzzed, and I know that's a terrible idea.
You're doing fine, my friend.
Oh, good. Thank God.